January 22nd, 2023. Mohe, Heilongjiang Province. The thermometer reads -53 degrees Celsius. At this temperature, diesel fuel turns to jelly. Rubber tires shatter like glass. Exposed skin dies in minutes. This is the coldest inhabited place in China. The locals call it China's North Pole. Now imagine this. The power grid fails, your electric furnace stops. Your insulation, fiberglass, drywall, foam, was never designed to hold heat. It was designed to trap air. And once that air escapes, your house becomes a tomb. But 800 years ago, in the same region, during the Little Ice Age, when winters were colder than today, the Chinese survived. No electricity, no natural gas, no modern insulation. They didn't heat the air, they heated the human. This is not a story about survival. This is a story about engineering. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the ancients knew something we've forgotten. But first, we need to meet the villain. What kind of cold are we really talking about? And why did it almost wipe out entire civilizations? The year is 1320. Europe is starving. The Thames River in London freezes solid for months. Crops fail across the continent. Famine kills millions. This isn't a bad winter. This is the beginning of the Little Ice Age, a climate war that lasted nearly 600 years. From the 1320s to the early 1900s, the Earth entered a deep freeze. Glaciers advanced across Europe. Harvests collapsed. Entire villages were abandoned. The cold didn't just kill, it erased civilizations. And China? China had seen this before. Between the 3rd and 5th centuries, during the Wei-Jin cold period, temperatures plummeted so low that it remains one of only 2 major cold phases in the last 2,000 years. The Chinese knew what cold could do. They had prepared. But let's be clear about what we're dealing with here. -53 degrees Celsius. That's not just cold, that's lethal. At -40, standard diesel fuel gels into a useless sludge. Engines won't start. Vehicles become statues. At -50, many rubbers become glassy and brittle. One impact, and they crack like porcelain. And your body? Exposed skin begins to freeze in under 5 minutes. Frostbite sets in almost immediately. Hypothermia follows. Death is measured in hours, if you're lucky. Now here's the problem with modern homes. We've built them to rely on convection, heating the air, fiberglass insulation, drywall, foam panels. These materials don't store heat. They trap pockets of warm air. And as long as your furnace is running, pumping heat into that air, you're fine. But the moment the power cuts, that warm air escapes through every crack, every seam, every poorly sealed window. And once it's gone, the structure itself has nothing left to give. No thermal mass, no stored energy, just cold walls and colder floors. Your modern home, in a blackout at -50 degrees, becomes uninhabitable in hours. But the ancient Chinese, they didn't heat the air, they heated the mass. They built homes that could survive a week without fire and still keep a human alive. How? Because they understood something we've forgotten. Heat isn't about temperature. It's about energy storage. And the best battery for heat isn't a machine, it's stone. So what exactly did they build? And how does a bed made of bricks stay warm for 15 hours after a single fire? Picture this, a raised platform, 2 meters long, 1/2 meter high, made entirely of brick and rammed earth. This is the Kang. And it's not a bed. It's a biomass heat exchanger. In northern China, the Kang was the center of the universe. Families ate on it, worked on it, slept on it, children played on it, elders rested on it. It wasn't furniture, it was a microclimate. But here's what makes it genius. The Kang doesn't burn wood to heat air. It burns wood to heat mass. Let me explain the mechanics. Inside the Kang is a hollow cavity, a network of flue channels, brick-lined tunnels that snake through the platform in a grid or serpentine pattern. These channels are connected to the cooking stove at one end and a chimney at the other. When you light the morning fire to cook breakfast, the hot exhaust doesn't go straight out. It's forced through the maze under the bed. The smoke travels slowly, deliberately, and as it moves, it transfers its heat into the surrounding brick. By the time the smoke exits the chimney, it's cool. That means 90% of the fire's energy has been captured by the masonry, not the air, the brick. Now here's where thermodynamics takes over. Brick has high thermal mass. That means it can absorb a lot of heat energy and release it slowly over time. Wood burns fast, hot and bright, then gone. But brick? Brick soaks the heat like a sponge and radiates it back for hours. A single fire in the morning can keep the Kang warm for 12 to 15 hours. No electricity, no thermostat, just physics. But it gets better. The surface of the Kang isn't just hot brick. Traditional construction layered the platform with multiple coats of plaster, clay mixed with straw, then clay with sand, then lime with hemp fibre. These layers act as thermal buffers, smoothing out temperature swings and preventing the surface from becoming uncomfortably hot. You could sleep directly on it, comfortably, all night. And here's the psychological brilliance. In a northern Chinese winter, the Kang created a warm zone. Instead of trying to heat an entire room, wasting fuel, wasting energy, the family concentrated their life around the one surface that mattered. The bed became the dining table, the workspace, the social hub. Everything happened within the warm envelope of the Kang. This is what I mean by heating the human, not the air. Modern homes try to maintain a uniform temperature throughout the entire structure. That's expensive, that's inefficient, and when the power fails, it's impossible. But the Kang? The Kang didn't care about the room temperature. It cared about the body temperature. As long as you were on the platform, you were warm. The rest of the house could be freezing. It didn't matter. Now let's talk about fuel efficiency. Ethnographic accounts and experimental reconstruction show that a well-built Kang, used daily, requires a fraction of the wood a traditional fireplace would consume. Because the heat isn't escaping up a chimney, it's being trapped in the structure. One small fire, 12 hours of warmth. Compare that to a modern electric furnace running continuously, burning through kilowatts, dependent on a grid that can fail at any moment. The Kang is fail-safe. It's stupid simple, and it works. But here's the question nobody asks. If the Kang was so effective for a family, why stop there? Why not scale it up? Why not heat an entire floor? What happens when you take the Kang concept and apply it to a palace? And how did the ancient Chinese build underfloor heating without pumps, without electricity, without anything we'd recognize as modern technology? The Qin dynasty, 221 BCE. The emperor's palace. Imagine walking barefoot across a stone floor in the dead of winter. And it's warm, not lukewarm, warm. This is the Hudi, ground heating. The Kang, but for an entire room. In elite dwellings and imperial palaces, the Chinese didn't stop at heating a bed. They heated the floor. Archaeological evidence from the Qin and Han dynasties shows rooms with floors suspended on brick pillars, creating a hollow space beneath. Hot air and smoke from a furnace, located outside the room, would flow through this cavity, heating the floor from below. The Romans had a similar system. They called it the hypocaust, but the Chinese version had one critical advantage: cleanliness. In a Roman hypocaust, the furnace was often inside or adjacent to the living space. Smoke, soot, and the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning were constant concerns. But in the Chinese Hu-Di system, the fire pit was outside, completely separate. The furnace, called the prefernium in Roman terms, though the Chinese had their own terminology, was built into an exterior wall or a dedicated furnace room. The hot gases were drawn through the underfloor channels by natural draft and vented through a remote chimney. The living space stayed perfectly clean. No smoke, no soot, no risk of suffocation. Just radiant warmth rising from the floor. Now let's talk about the pepper rooms, the jiaofang. In Han Dynasty palaces, certain elite bedrooms had walls plastered with a mixture of clay and crushed pepper seeds, specifically Sichuan pepper. Why? Symbolically, pepper represented warmth, fertility, and luxury. But practically, the pepper mud coating created a thick, textured clay render layer. This added thermal mass to the walls, helping them retain heat. It also had hygroscopic properties, meaning it could absorb and release moisture, stabilizing humidity in the room. Was it a game changer? No, but it was smart. Every detail mattered, every layer contributed. The ancient Chinese didn't rely on one trick. They stacked advantages. Now here's where the engineering gets fascinating. Modern radiant floor heating uses electric cables or hydronic pipes. Water heated by a boiler, pumped through tubes embedded in concrete. It's effective, but it's fragile. If the pump fails, the system stops. If the boiler breaks, you're done. If the power grid collapses, you freeze. The ancient Chinese system? It used gravity and air pressure, no pumps, no electronics. The fire heats air. Hot air rises. The pressure differential pulls the smoke through the underfloor channels. The chimney at the far end creates a draft, drawing the gases through the system. It's passive, it's elegant, and it cannot fail as long as you have fuel and a match. But here's the efficiency gap. Modern systems heat water to 60 or 70 degrees Celsius, then pump it through pipes. There's energy loss at every stage, heating the water, moving it through the system, radiating it into the room. The ancient system? It captures the exhaust heat directly. No middleman. The smoke is already hot. You just route it where you need it. By the time it exits the chimney, it's cool, meaning the structure has absorbed the maximum possible energy. This is why the Hu-Di could keep a palace room warm for hours after the fire died. The floor itself became a thermal battery, hundreds of kilograms of brick and stone, saturated with heat, radiating it back into the room at a slow, steady rate. You could walk barefoot, you could sleep on the floor, you could live in comfort even as the world outside froze. And here's the thing. This wasn't experimental technology. This was standard in elite Chinese architecture for over 1,000 years. From the Qin dynasty through the Tang and Song, underfloor heating was a known, proven, reliable system. And then we forgot it. We replaced it with systems that require constant energy input, complex machinery, and a functioning electrical grid. We traded resilience for convenience. And when the grid fails, we freeze. But the ancient Chinese? They built homes that could survive a climate war. And they didn't stop at floors. They went underground. What happens when you carve your home directly into the earth? And how does a cave stay 30 degrees warmer than a modern cabin in the same blizzard? The Les Plateau, northern China, a landscape of soft, yellow earth, carved by wind, shaped by time. And here, the Chinese didn't build homes. They excavated them. This is the Yaodong, the cave dwelling, and it's one of the most thermally efficient structures ever designed. Let me explain the physics. At 3 meters below the surface, soil temperature stabilizes. It doesn't fluctuate with the seasons. It doesn't respond to daily temperature swings. It sits at roughly 10 to 15 degrees Celsius year-round. That's the geothermal baseline. Now imagine it's minus 50 degrees Celsius outside. Your modern wooden cabin, with its thin walls and fiberglass insulation, is starting from minus 50. It has to fight its way up to a livable temperature. But a Yaodong starts at 10 degrees Celsius. That's a 60-degree head start. Before you even light a fire, the earth has already done half the work. Now let's talk about construction. A Yaodong is typically carved into a hillside or cliff face. The walls are loess, a fine, wind-deposited silt that's easy to dig, but compacts into a stable, load-bearing structure. The roof is arched, the walls are thick, often 2 meters or more, and the entire structure is surrounded by earth, millions of kilograms of thermal mass. When you light a fire inside a Yaodong, the heat doesn't escape through the walls. It's absorbed by the loess. The earth drinks the heat, storing it in its mass. And because the earth changes temperature so slowly, on the scale of weeks, not hours, the interior temperature remains stable. Monitoring data from cave dwellings in northern China shows winter indoor air temperatures commonly ranging from 9 to 17 degrees Celsius, even when outdoor temperatures are well below freezing. No active heating, just the earth. But here's where it gets even smarter. The Dikeng, the sunken courtyard. In some Yaodong complexes, the courtyard isn't at ground level. It's below ground level. Imagine digging a pit 6 to 10 meters deep into the loess. Then, from the walls of that pit, you carve individual cave rooms, each opening onto the central courtyard. The courtyard becomes a light well, a circulation space, and a wind shelter. The earth banks around the courtyard act as a barrier, shielding the entrances from the brutal northern winds. Cold air can't blast directly into the rooms. Instead, it passes over the sunken space, leaving the interior relatively calm. Meanwhile, during the day, sunlight floods the courtyard. The earth walls absorb solar heat. That heat radiates into the rooms at night. It's passive solar design, 2,000 years before we had a name for it. Now let's compare this to a modern structure. A typical lightweight wood frame house in a cold climate has low thermal mass. The walls are thin. The insulation is designed to trap air, not store heat. When the furnace stops, the house loses heat rapidly. Within hours, the interior temperature can drop to near outdoor levels. Even with no active fire, a Yaodong can stay 20 to 30 degrees warmer than the outside air, because the earth itself is a buffer. It resists temperature change. It stabilizes the interior environment. And here's the survival stat that matters. In a prolonged blackout, in a severe cold snap, a modern cabin becomes uninhabitable in less than a day. A Yaodong remains survivable for weeks. Because the thermal mass of the earth is so vast, so immense, that it takes weeks for the interior temperature to equilibrate with the outside. You have time to gather fuel, time to plan, time to survive. This is what I mean by fail-safe architecture. The Yaodong doesn't rely on a supply chain. It doesn't rely on a power grid. It doesn't rely on anything except the Earth itself. And the Earth is always there. Now here's the modern irony. Today, architects and building scientists are rediscovering Earth-sheltered design. They're studying Yaodong thermal performance. They're writing papers on passive geothermal stabilization. They're calling it innovative, but it's not innovative, it's ancient. The Chinese figured this out 2 millennia ago. They built homes that could survive the Little Ice Age. They built homes that could survive the Weijin Cold Period. They built homes that could survive anything. And we built homes that fail when the power goes out. So if the ancients were so smart, why did we abandon these systems? And what does the 17th century German philosopher have to do with Chinese thermal engineering? Here's the question nobody wants to ask. If these systems were so effective, if the Kang, the Hudi, and the Yaodong were so thermally efficient, so resilient, so smart, why did we stop using them? The answer is simple. We traded passive systems for active systems. We traded resilience for convenience. In the 20th century, cheap energy changed everything. Electricity became abundant. Natural gas became cheap. We could afford to heat entire homes to a uniform temperature, 24 hours a day, all winter long. And it worked, as long as the grid stayed up, as long as the gas kept flowing, as long as nothing went wrong. But when something does go wrong, when a winter storm knocks out power to millions, when a pipeline freezes, when the system fails, we're helpless. Because we've built homes that are dependent on infrastructure, dependent on supply chains, dependent on systems we don't control. The ancient Chinese built homes that were independent, self-sufficient, fail-safe. And here's the vindication. Modern architects are now studying these ancient systems. Passive house design, earth-sheltered architecture, thermal mass construction, net zero energy homes. These aren't new ideas. They're old ideas, ideas we abandoned, ideas we're now rediscovering. Because we're finally realizing that the ancients weren't primitive. They were smarter. They understood that true resilience doesn't come from complexity. It comes from simplicity, from systems that work without electricity, without pumps, without anything that can break. And here's the final twist. In 1703, the German philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz studied the I Ching, the ancient Chinese book of changes. He recognized that the hexagrams represented a binary system, ones and zeros, the foundation of modern computing, the same civilization that encoded binary logic in a divination manual, also built homes that functioned as thermal batteries. They understood energy storage, they understood thermodynamics, they understood systems, and they built accordingly. So the next time you're sitting in your modern home, dependent on a furnace, dependent on a grid, dependent on systems you don't understand, remember this. 800 years ago, in the coldest winters humanity has ever known, the Chinese survived. Not because they had better technology, but because they had better engineering. They didn't heat the air, they heated the human. And that made all the difference. Click subscribe for more discoveries and wonders from ancient China. See you in the next one.